So today I have another interesting story, and this story revolves around a guy called Bill Benter. Now, when we usually think of horse racing, the number of different variables and outcomes usually makes it a dangerous place for gamblers. In fact, the American sportswriter Roger Kahn once described the sport as animated roulette. Warwick Bartlett, who runs global betting and gaming consultants and has spent years studying the industry, states, "If you bet on horses, you will lose." But what if that rule had an exception? What if one guy had masterminded a system to rake in the profit and made almost $1 billion? Enter Bill Benter. So where does the story begin? Benter grew up in Pleasant Hills in Pittsburgh. He was a diligent student and Eagle Scout, and he began to study physics in college. However, in 1979, at the age of 22, he left school, boarded a Greyhound bus, and went to play cards in Las Vegas. Benter was a huge fan of the book Beat the Dealer by math professor Edward Thorpe that describes how to overcome the house's advantage in blackjack. In fact, Thorpe is credited with inventing the system known as card counting. When Benter got to Las Vegas, he worked at a 7-Eleven for $3 an hour and took his wages to budget casinos. The Westin, with its dollar cocktails and shabby patrons getting drunk at 10 a.m, and the faded El Cortez were his turf. On a good day, Benter might win around $40, which is the equivalent of around $240 today. Now, it was easy to spot Thorpe's disciples. They were sober and focused. And just like them, Benter was a total nerd, complete with a small beard, tweedy jacket, and a passion for probability theory. In 1980, he'd actually just applied for a job as a night cleaner at McDonald's. When his Thorpe-loving buddies introduced him to Alan Woods, the leader of an Australian card counting team that had recently arrived in Las Vegas. Woods had an interesting story too. Once an insurance actuary with a wife and 2 kids, he one day decided that family life wasn't for him and decided to travel the world as a gambler. Benter was impressed by Woods' stories. For example, Woods described a time in Manila where he snuck past airport security with around 10 grand stuffed in his underpants. Benter was also impressed by how Woods handled his affairs. No, not like that. How Woods handled the team's affairs. His team would pool cash together and divide winnings equally, which reduced the risk of a run of bad luck wiping out somebody's individual bankroll. And also the team aspect provided a good sense of camaraderie, or as it's known in the UK, banter. Another aspect that attracted Benter was the fact that Woods approached the craft of card counting with discipline. So, Benter joined the squad. Within just 6 weeks, Benter found himself playing blackjack in Monte Carlo, served by waiters in dinner jackets. He felt like James Bond, and his earnings grew to around $80,000 per year, which is the equivalent of around $250k today. Now, clearly at this point, Benter was not returning to college. When his mother's friends in Pittsburgh asked how Bill was doing, she replied, "Bill's traveling right now." Benter and his team then got a house in the Vegas suburbs and essentially lived like geeky college frat bros. As drinking on the job was strictly forbidden, they would wait until after their shifts were finished to have a few beers and trade stories of close encounters with casino security, who obviously weren't too keen on card counters. A couple of years in, Benter was playing one day when he got the dreaded hand on the shoulder plus come with me combination. In a back room, Benter was shoved into a chair and told to produce some identification. He refused. The guard walked out and a more menacing guy walked in. "Show me your effing ID," the guy said. Benter then took out his wallet and showed his ID. In 1984, Benter, Woods and some of their partners earned a place on the infamous Griffin Book, a blacklist that detective agencies circulated to casinos. This made it practically impossible for them to keep playing in Vegas. They needed to find another game. Woods knew that there were giant horse betting pools in Asia, the biggest of which was run by the Hong Kong Jockey Club. Its 2 courses, Happy Valley and Sha Tin, were packed twice a week during a racing season that extended from September to July. Back then, the population of Hong Kong was around 5.5 million, but it bet more on horses than the entire US, reaching around $10 billion annually by the 1990s. Hong Kong racing uses a pari-mutuel, also known as totalizer system. Unlike odds in a Vegas sportsbook, which are set in advance and give a decisive edge to the house, pari-mutuel odds are updated fluidly in proportion to how people bet. Winners split the pool and the house skims a commission of around 17%. After cost, the jockey club's take goes to charity and the state, providing as much as a tenth of Hong Kong's tax revenue. Because of this, Benter would have to do more than just pick winners. He needed to make bets with a profit margin greater than the club's 17% cut. So in true nerd fashion, Benter did some research. He went to the Gamblers Book Club, a Vegas institution, and bought everything he could find on horses. He found lots of systems promising incredible results, but to him they seemed flimsy and written by journalists and amateur handicappers. Few contained real math. Benter wanted something more rigorous, so he went to the library at the University of Nevada at Las Vegas, and buried in stacks of periodicals and manuscripts he found what he was looking for. An academic paper titled Searching for Positive Returns at the Track, a multinomial logic model for handicapping horse races. Benter sat down to read it, and when he was done, he read it again. The paper argued that the success or failure of a horse was based around factors that could be probabilistically quantified. Take variables such as straight line speed, size, winning record, the skill of the jockey, weigh them, and hey presto, out comes a prediction of the horse's chances. The predictions are improved by having more variables, better variables, and finer weightings. The authors weren't sure that their strategy could be used to make money, and they were mostly interested in the statistical model, so they never really tried. However, Benter did. He taught himself advanced statistics and learned to write software on an early PC with a green and black screen. Meanwhile, in the fall of 1984, Woods flew to Hong Kong and sent back a stack of yearbooks containing the results of thousands of races. Benter hired 2 people to key the results into a database by hand, such that he could spend more time studying regressions and developing code. The process took 9 months. In September 1985, he flew to Hong Kong with 3 bulky IBM computers in his checked luggage. Benter and Woods rented a microscopic apartment in a high-rise, with their office consisting of an old desk and a wooden table piled high with racing newspapers. If they went out at all, it was to the McDonald's down the street.
もしもし、ドナルドです。
Bonjour, Mr. McDonald. It is time. Activa technological and employment.
Twice a week on the race days, Benter would sit at the computer and Woods would study the racing form. Early on, the betting program that Benter had developed spat out some bizarre predictions. Woods, with his year-long head start of studying the races, would often correct them. They used a telephone account at the jockey club to call in their bets and watch the races on TV. However, when they won, there were satisfied smiles only. They were professionals. Cheering was for the amateurs. Between races, Benter would struggle to keep his algorithms ahead of a phenomenon known as gambler's ruin. This basically means that when a player with limited funds keeps betting against an opponent with effectively unlimited funds, i.e. a casino or the betting population of Hong Kong, they will eventually go broke even if the game is fair. All lucky streaks come to an end and losing runs are fatal. One approach, familiar to Benter from his blackjack days, was to adapt the work of a gunslinging Texas physicist named John Kelly Jr., who'd studied the problem in the 1950s. Kelly imagined a scenario in which a horse racing gambler has an edge, a private wire of fairly reliable tips. How should they bet? Bet too little and the advantage is wasted, and bet too much and get wrecked. Remember, the tips are good, but not perfect. Kelly's solution was to wage an amount in line with the gambler's confidence in the tip. Benter was struck by the similarities between Kelly's hypothetical tip wire and his own predictive generating software. They were essentially the same thing, a proprietary system of odds that was slightly more accurate than the public odds. To simplify, imagine that the gambling public can bet on a given horse at a payout of 4 to 1. Benter's model might show that the horse is more likely to win than those odds suggest. Say a chance of 1 in 3. This means that Benter can put less at risk and get the same return, a seemingly small edge that can turn into a big profit. And the impact of bad luck can be diminished by betting thousands and thousands of times. Kelly's equations applied to the scale of betting made possible by computer modelling seem to guarantee success, if that is, the model were accurate. By the end of Benter's first season in Hong Kong in the summer of 1986, he and Woods had lost $120,000 of their $150,000 stake. Benter then flew back to Vegas to beg for investment, unsuccessfully, and Woods went to South Korea to gamble. They met back up in Hong Kong in September. Woods had more money than Benter and he was willing to provide capital to their partnership, if it was renegotiated. "I want a larger share," Woods said, according to Benter. How much larger? Benter asked. 90%, Woods said. That's unacceptable, Benter said. Woods was used to being the senior partner in gambling teams and getting his way. He never lost his temper, but his mind, once set, was like concrete. Benter was also unwilling to budge, so their alliance was over. As a parting shot, Benter wrote a line in the code of their software that would stop it functioning after a certain date, a digital time bomb, even though he knew it would be trivial for Woods to find and fix it later. Woods would keep betting algorithmically on horses, Benter was sure of it, and he resolved that he would too. Benter's Las Vegas friends wouldn't stake him at horse racing, but they would at blackjack. He took their money to Atlantic City and spent 2 years managing a team of card counters and worked on the horse racing model in his spare time. In September 1988, having amassed a few $100,000, he returned to Hong Kong. Sure enough, Woods was still there. The Australian had hired programmers and mathematicians to further develop Benter's code, and he was making money. Woods had moved into a penthouse with a spectacular view, and Benter refused to talk to him. Benter's model monitored only around 20 inputs, just a fraction of the infinite factors that influence a horse's performance, from wind speed to what it ate for breakfast. In pursuit of mathematical perfection, he became convinced that horses race differently according to temperature. And when he learned that British meteorologists kept an archive of Hong Kong weather data in southwest England, he travelled there by plane and rail. A bemused archivist led him to a dusty library basement, where Benter copied years of figures into his notebook. When he got back to Hong Kong, he entered the data into his computers and found it had no effect whatsoever on race outcomes. Other additions, such as the number of rest days since the horse's last race, proved more successful, and in his first year, Benter made, as he recalls, $600,000. The next racing season, ending in the summer of 1990, he lost a little bit of money, but he was still up overall. He hired an employee, Color Donato, who would stay with him for years, and a rotating cast of consultants, independent gamblers, journalists, analysts, coders, mathematicians. When the volume of bets rose, he recruited English-speaking Filipinos from the ranks of the city's housekeepers to relay his bets to the jockey club's telebet phone lines, reading wagers at the rate of 8 a minute. A breakthrough came when Benter hit on the idea of incorporating a dataset hiding in plain sight, the jockey club's publicly available betting odds. Building his own set of odds from scratch had been profitable, but he found that using the public odds as a starting point and then refining them with his proprietary algorithm was even more profitable. He considered this as his single most important innovation, and in the 1990 to 1991 season he said he won around $3 million. The following year, the Hong Kong Jockey Club phoned Benter at an office he'd established in Happy Valley.
Hello? What? No, I'm in a restaurant! No, I'm in a restaurant, hang on!
He winced as he remembered the meaty hand of the Las Vegas pit boss on his shoulder, but instead of threatening him, a jockey club salesperson said, "You are one of our best customers. What can we do to help you?" The club wasn't a casino trying to root out gamblers who regularly beat the house. Its incentive was to maximize betting activity so more revenue was available for Hong Kong charities and the government. Benter asked if it was possible to place his bets electronically rather than over the phone. The jockey club agreed to install what he called the big CIT, a customer input terminal. He ran a cable from his computers directly into the machine and increased his betting. Now it's worth pointing out that Benter had achieved something really incredible, basically a horse racing quantitative hedge fund, using probabilistic modelling to beat the market. Probably the only one of its kind was Woods' operation, and Benter had effectively written most of that code base. Their returns kept growing, and Benter and Woods were effectively rolling in the cash at this point. Woods made $10 million in the 1994-95 season and bought a Rolls Royce that he never drove. Benter purchased a stake in a French vineyard, and at this point it was impossible to keep their success a secret, and they both attracted employees and hanger-ons, some of whom switched back and forth between Benter and Woods' teams. One of these was a guy by the name of Bob Moore, a manic New Zealander whose passions were coke, not the drink, and video analysis. He'd watch footage of past races to identify horses that should have won but were bumped or blocked and prevented them from doing so. It worked as a kind of bad luck adjuster and actually made the algorithms more effective. The computer model crowd spent nights in a neighbourhood called Wan Chai, a melting pot of gaudy bars and topless dancers that's been described as a wildly liberated Las Vegas. Moore favoured Ridgway's pool bar, where he'd start fights and boast about his gambling exploits. Woods didn't drink much, but he enjoyed ecstasy, and he could be found most nights in Neptune 2, a neon dungeon full of drunk businessmen and much younger women. Now, Benter, on the other hand, was a much more reserved presence. He could often be seen sitting at the end of a bar, engaged in a quiet conversation. However, despite this, an aura started to grow around Benter. He was the acknowledged mastermind behind all of this. Even Woods, in a later interview with an Australian journalist, admitted that Benter's model was the best. But the two men couldn't resolve their differences. When Benter saw his old partner in Wan Chai, he would smile politely and walk away. They'd gone 10 years without speaking. Throughout 1997, a shadow loomed over Hong Kong. After 156 years of colonial rule, the British were set to hand the territory back to China on July 1st. There were news reports of Chinese troops massed at the border, and many islanders feared it would be the end of Hong Kong's freewheeling capitalism. China tried to reassure residents that their most treasured customs would be protected. Horse racing will continue, and the dancing parties will go on. However, Benter faced an additional and more peculiar problem. A month before the handover, his team won a huge triple trio jackpot. They were in the middle of an epic winning season, up more than $50 million. The Jockey Club normally put triple trio winners in front of the TV cameras to show how, for example, a night watchman had changed his life with a single bet. This time, nobody wanted to tout that the winner was an American algorithm. The club had come to see the syndicate's success as a headache. There was no law against what they were doing, but it is a para-mutual gambling system. Every dollar they won was a dollar lost by somebody else. If the everyday punters at Happy Valley and Shatin ever found out that foreign computer nerds were siphoning millions from the pools, they might stop playing entirely. So Benter had his big CIT privileges revoked. On June 14th, one of his phone operators called the Telebet line and was told, "Your account has been suspended." Woods was also blocked. Club officials issued a statement saying they had acted to protect the interest of the general betting public. Benter then flew back to Vegas, as he did every summer, to think about his next move. He reread the club's statement. Form betting was out, but nowhere did it say that he was prohibited from betting altogether. He had an idea. As in his blackjack days, it would require a low profile. One Friday evening that autumn, after the handover of the territory to China, Benter paid for a hotel room in Hong Kong's Bayside North Point district. He made sure to get a space on the ground floor for easy access. He had helpers hauling laptops, a £50 printer, and stacks of blank betting slips. On Saturday morning, race day, they checked the internet connection and put a "Do Not Disturb" sign on the door. At 1:45 PM, 15 minutes before the first race, the laptops received lines of bets from Benter's Happy Valley office. The printer began to suck in blank tickets and churn them out with black marks in the relevant betting boxes. 8 minutes to the starting pistol. Benter grabbed a pile of 80-odd printed tickets and a club-issued credit voucher worth 1 million Hong Kong dollars and bolted for the door. Across from the hotel was an off-track betting shop. It was loud and smoky inside, and he found an automated betting terminal free at one side of the room. 2 minutes to go. He started feeding in the tickets, one after another, until the screen flashed a message, "Betting closed." Benter then hurried back to his hotel room to see which wagers had hit. At 2:15 PM, the laptops downloaded the next package of bets from the office. Time to go again. Simultaneously, other teams hired by Benter were doing the same thing in different parts of Hong Kong. Benter's solution to the phone ban was time-consuming, and required him to manage teams of runners who did risk being robbed, but it was almost as profitable as his old arrangement. The club continued to exchange his cash vouchers for checks, and no one came to shut him down. Woods kept betting in a slightly different manner, sending members of an extended roster of Philippine girlfriends directly to the racetrack with bags full of cash. Now, publicity is generally a curse for real professional gamblers. That winter, an increasingly erratic Moore drew more attention to algorithmic betting, first by bragging to the local press, who nicknamed him the God of Horses, and then by fatally overdosing on sleeping pills. Afterwards, Hong Kong's tax authority began to investigate the Woods syndicate. By law, gambling winnings were exempt from taxation, but company profits weren't. The question was whether the syndicates had moved beyond conventional betting and had started to behave like corporations. The implications would be dire if the Inland Revenue Department decided to tax profits retroactively. When agents asked Woods for a list of his investors, he fled to the Philippines. Benter continued to operate his in-person betting team through the turn of the millennium, with his model expanding to track more than 120 factors per horse, but the logistics were proving a grind. He also felt disconnected from his geeky gambling friends in Wan Chai. He had started to mix with a more professional crowd, adopting their dress code of smart suits and ties, and he'd taken a more active role in the local Rotary Club chapter. Benter embraced its motto of service above self, giving millions of dollars anonymously and visiting impoverished schools in China and refugee camps in Pakistan. For the first time, he thought seriously about quitting and moved back to the US. If it all has to end, he thought, I've had an incredible run. It was then in November 2001 that he decided to have a final punt on the Triple Trio. Benter had avoided major prizes since 1997 for fear of angering the Jockey Club's management, but this jackpot was too big to resist. It was an expensive bet. He spent around 1.6 million Hong Kong dollars on around 51,000 combinations. He decided that if he won, he would leave the tickets unclaimed, and club policy in such cases is to direct the money to a charitable trust. After Bobo Duck, Mascot Treasure and Frat Rat romped across the finish line, and days turned into weeks with no one collecting the prize, Benter was really unprepared for the level of mounting public interest. The ghost of the unclaimed $60 million Triple Trio, wrote the racing columnist for the South China Morning Post. Outlandish theories began to spread around Hong Kong. One said that the winner had watched the final leg and died of shock. Finally, Benter sent an anonymous letter to the Jockey Club's directors explaining his intentions. Later in 2001, without any warning, Jockey Club officials lifted the telephone betting ban. It was as if Benter's gift had appeased the gambling gods. The club also bowed to public pressure and allowed customers to wager over the internet from their homes. Benter opted to move back to Pittsburgh, where he continued to bet. He didn't want to spend his whole life in Hong Kong. In Manila, Woods lived like a hermit, binging on drugs for days at a time, waited on by young women he hired to keep him company. He employed gamblers remotely in Australia and Hong Kong, but he was a difficult boss. He accused staff of stealing, and once he made everybody take IQ tests before telling them all how much smarter he was than them. Woods started calling himself Marmu, short for Master of My Universe. Almost as if there's a common link here. In December 2007, Woods sent a letter to Business Review Weekly, an Australian magazine, asking to be considered for its rich list. I had planned to delay my hope for inclusion until I could make it into the top 10. However, as of today, it appears I won't live long enough. Woods had been diagnosed with cancer. He came back to Happy Valley for treatment, and the hospital he was in Hong Kong was in sight of the racetrack. He spent his final days beating his friends at a Chinese card game known as Ko Dai Di, and died on January 26, 2008 at 62. Interviews with Woods' friends, employees and other sources indicate that he had amassed a fortune of around $800 million at the time of his death, and to his last day, Woods never believed that Benter had won the 2001 Triple Trio. Now today, of course, online betting of all forms is growing massively around the world, except maybe the USA, and is worth around $60 billion annually. Now, the legality depends on the state, but clearly the US could be a very important market for this industry moving forwards, and the big names of finance have taken notice. In 2016, SIG, an American quantitative trading company, started an island-based operation targeting baseball, American football, soccer and tennis. Phoenix, a proprietary sports betting company with headquarters in Malta and data mining operations in the Philippines, won a £9 million investment in 2010 from a unit of RIT Capital Partners plc. The £3 billion trust chaired by Lord Jacob Rothschild, insert Rothschild reference for the YouTube algorithm by the way, smash that like button, and RIT sold its stake in 2016 to a private buyer, quadrupling its money. What isn't widely known is that Phoenix was founded by former employees of Woods, including his protege Paul Longmuir. In fact, many of the biggest players in sports betting can trace a lineage directly to the Benter-Woods axis. For example, the Australian press has called Zelcho Rank, all these weird names, the world's biggest punter. Today he runs a global algorithmic gambling empire, but he began his career in Las Vegas counting cards with Benter and Woods, then followed them to Hong Kong. During a rare interview in London, he said, "A substantial portion of our success is attributable to the pioneering work of Benter." In 2007, Benter started the charitable Benter Foundation, which donates to health, education and the arts, and many of the people he meets at fundraising galas and nights at the opera have no idea how he made his money. So, exactly how much did he make? Well, William Zembier, a finance professor at the University of British Columbia who studied the Hong Kong syndicates, has said that a first-rate team could make around $100 million in a good season. Edward Thorpe, who's still writing about gambling in his 80s, asserted in a 2017 book that Benter had a $1 billion worldwide betting business on horse races. When pushed, Benter conceded that his operations have probably made close to $1 billion overall, but some of the money has gone to partners in Hong Kong and the US. Unfortunately, he said, "I'm not a billionaire." Now today, Benter also runs a medical transcription company, but it's only modestly profitable. "I find the real business world to be a lot more difficult than horse racing," he said. "I'm kind of a one-trick pony." For more compounded valuable content, subscribe and like.